Hello and welcome back to Chat About It, Don't Shout About It with me, Rachel, the Queen of the Woke, as crowned by one of my haters. Don't forget to subscribe. I'm trying to get to 1,400 subscribers. Thank you to everyone who has joined me already. I can't do this without you. Today we are actually going to be taking a break from looking at the classic Who reviews to look at the colorized version of the War Games for My Sins. I don't actually tend to watch these versions because they cut chunks out of this unceremoniously, and then edits like this never really live up to my expectations as to what I actually expect from them. That's just me though. If you like it, that is absolutely fine. You are allowed to like something that I don't. I'm not even a fan of updated effects. My opinion is, if it's not broke, then why are you fixing it? I have two massive burning issues with this particular colorized version of the War Games. I will be addressing them in this review, but I will get to those later. I'm pretty sure you already know what they are anyway. There are great points and bad points about converting this story into color and then snipping it down to 90 minutes. Remember, the original story, the official story I should actually say, is 10 parts and it's around 250 minutes approximately. I do have a full review of the original official story. If you would like to check that out, then I have linked those below for you to actually go and view for your own viewing pleasure. And as normal, I will of course naturally miss a load of things out when talking about this version of the War Games, so feel free to leave your comments below. Did you watch it? Did you not? Did you like it? Did you not? What are your opinions? Let me know. The Doctor, Zoe and Jamie land in the middle of World War I. They are captured and put on trial. The Doctor is to be executed and Jamie and Zoe in prison. They manage to escape and discover that there is much more than one war happening. They unearth information that tells them there is something sinister going on. War veterans are being pulled out of their own time, brainwashed and put into the games by the war chief, a renegade Time Lord, at the command of the warlords. The Doctor, Zoe and Jamie work together with Carstairs and the Resistance to put a stop to it. They only succeed when the Doctor enlists the help of the Time Lords. He is then subsequently put on trial, exiled and forced to regenerate. The War Games was originally written by Terence Dicks and Malcolm Holt. They didn't have a lot of allotted time in order to do this story. Stories that were originally in the making for those 10 episodes were scrapped, so they had a massive gap to fill, which is how they came up with doing a 10-part story. We were promised a colorized version of this story, plus a lot more than that. Here's what Phil Collinson had to say as to the reason why they were actually doing a colorized version of the War Games. I love those stories. I grew up with them. We would never take them away. They are there for all the people to watch. It's just that some viewers, especially younger ones, find it difficult to sit down and watch hours and hours of black and white material. I love it, and lots of people do. These stories are great. They are as good as anything we're transmitting now. It's just that sometimes they need a bit of help to sing to people. That's what we are doing, and we're doing it with so much love. Do you know, I sometimes think that people actually underestimate young audiences. If something is really great, then they will watch it regardless of whether it is in colour or in black and white. And whilst for the most part they probably do wish it is in colour, they generally won't have any issues with getting into it at all. That's just an observation that I have after working with kids for 10 years. When I was watching it, I was trying to think how it would be for the first time watcher. This is what I think. I think if someone is a first time watcher and they see this, then they would enjoy it and understand its basics. However, if that then prompted them to go out and watch the full 10 episodes, then they would either get confused because, to be fair, the basic adaptation doesn't really challenge the mind, and maybe even question why certain things were cut from the colour version that really should have been kept in there. There's also things that are playing in the background music-wise that new viewers would perhaps potentially recognise and then associate it with a certain character and then put two and two together, because Phil Collinson really wants this particular thing to actually become part of the hard canon, because it is his headcanon, and if it is there, then that is what the new viewers will do. It becomes true because he put it there and they say it's true. More on that later though. The colouring of the material is actually very good. I was impressed. I think that colouring black and white footage can be a very tricky thing for someone to do. They really did achieve it. bit. The color was at its best quality with the studio scenes. This is because the studio scenes had the best resolution. The outdoor scenes, it was easier to notice the fuzziness. I think that they could have focused some time on cleaning up the footage, but how far do you actually do that without damaging the original content? The music itself, albeit one piece, I didn't actually mind it, although some of it was a little bit too loud and it didn't match the sound levels of the original audio. There were also some audio issues as well. So a common thing that they actually had going in this was that they spliced bits together and moved things around and overlaid sound onto other scenes, which is fine, but some of them really did not actually sound particularly clear, particularly during the bit when the Romans were attacking them. You couldn't really hear what was saying because they overlaid it, and so thus it was actually lost within the realms of the audio. And I really think because of that, they should have just cut those bits all together. Keep the Romans chasing them because obviously they need that to highlight the fact that there are different war zones, but just cut the lines from it if they could. Now, there's always risks with cutting things down, and there's always positives with cutting things down as well. This is by no means the official version of the war games. The official and hard canon version is the original story, the 10 episodes black and white version. However, the edit does actually do one thing that the original version doesn't. And I'm pretty sure that had they actually had the time to sit down and really plow through it and do a lot of heavy editing originally, then they would have perhaps done this as well. The opening sequence is sped up. It is a bit of a slow start in the original official version of this story, and they also cut the amount of times we had the same trope of the storyline of them being captured. I've said, and I always will maintain, that the war games needed to be cut down to 8 parts and the warlord introduced earlier. They also made the choice to splice some of the other capture sequences together with speech from other characters. I didn't mind that either, however, there were a lot of cutaways in this, but I also really did enjoy the new footage. That's always a positive to see, but most of the time I always miss it because I tend to actually avoid the updated stories. Some of the issues that we actually have with the story being spliced together in the way that it is, particularly if you know the story like I do, is that it gets a little clunky. And because of the clunkiness, it does actually take away from the intention behind the scenes and why they were done in the first place. For example, in the court-martial, they cut the part where the general hypnotizes the other 2 characters. The hypnotism is important for the alien characters, and I always thought it integral for the Doctor and the others to witness it. It's partly why I believe that Zoe finds the communication devices, which in this version she obviously does find the communication versions, but she doesn't actually tell the Doctor about it, or at least that's what we see in the colour version. In fact, there's actually a few things like that that happens within this story, and another one of those important things I actually think is the conversation between Lady Jennifer and Carstairs. In the original version, we actually see them talking about the fact that they're not actually remembering things. Well, they cut that from the colour version, and because of that, their later conversation that they have about them remembering things and the mist doesn't make any sense, because it leaves the viewer wondering, what on earth were they talking about? I didn't hear this conversation. What do they mean? Now, obviously, it does get explained later because they still have the mist scene before they go into the Romans' war zone. But just for that moment, the viewer's like, what are they talking about? They also cut the scene where Zoe is actually being interrogated when they are captured by the warlords. And they shouldn't have done that either, because I think they should have actually kept that in instead of having her just hanging her head down for when the Doctor rescues her, because the device that they're using is incredibly powerful and it needs to show that it can break a human's mind, whereas it can't break the Time Lord's mind. We only get about 2 minutes with Harper as well, and you all know I love the character of Harper. I love Rudolph Walker. I think he's amazingly talented. They really did Rudolph a massive dirty on this one, in my opinion. However, because they limited his screen time, that meant we didn't get the correct introduction for some of the Resistance members at the correct time, and some of the parts that were integral to introducing the Resistance members were also cut. They just randomly turn up out of nowhere, and I can imagine the viewer being like, who are you? The updated effects were okay. okay. That's just my opinion. You know, I'm not a big fan of updated effects. I don't go out my way to watch them. In actual fact, this is probably the second one that I have watched with some updated effects. The first one was Enlightenment, and I was absolutely livid with myself for doing that. They're not really needed, but they're fine for what they were. We didn't really need the New Who Doctors inserted into the regeneration options for the Doctor either, but I have no major opinion on that other than that, but I'm sure that some of my viewers will have an opinion on it, and it would be great to actually hear your views. Most of the trial for the Doctor had been cut from this, unfortunately. That was to make time for the new regeneration footage, which was based on a regeneration sequence that YouTube channel The Confession Dial did. I've linked that original regeneration sequence video below for you to actually go and watch. I highly recommend that you do. It is pretty much the same as what we actually get in the colorized version of the War Games. There are some changes here and there with it though. Now I do actually like what he did with it originally. I am going to say that as a little disclaimer. However, I will say this. I really wish that the BBC had got him to do something different for it. So the BBC, just for a little bit of background, they employed him to do this, and a few changes were made, but essentially it's pretty much the same verbatim. I wish the BBC had got him to do something different because they used it as the regeneration sequence, but now there's nothing to actually separate it from the version that I've watched on YouTube. That's on the BBC, that's not on the Confession Dial. I'm actually pretty pleased that they took the opportunity to give the Confession Dial an opportunity to do something like that, because not many fan creators can actually say they worked on this, they worked on Doctor Who, and they actually created a regeneration sequence from the second into the third Doctor. Now, I can actually imagine that because they've used pretty much the same sort of thing, that his hands are probably going to be tied a little bit now. I'm not saying that they are, I'm just saying that I can imagine that would be the case. And there's very likely to be multiple uploads of it now officially appearing on YouTube as well. When asked about the regeneration, this is what Phil Collinson had to say. I was really excited about regenerating Patrick Troughton into John Pertwee. It was exciting because the regeneration was missing from the original, and I really hope it becomes canon. Whenever they do those montages of all the regenerations, I want this to be in there because I always felt like it was missing a bit of Doctor Who. Really? Well, I can think of another Doctor who actually deserves to have his own regeneration sequence because he was royally snubbed as well. So he would like this one to become canon, and people are already treating it as the official regeneration. Except the official regeneration is the black and white version. It matches the uncertainty that was actually going on within Doctor Who at the time of recording. And whilst I do actually like the fan edit of the regeneration, the original always, in my opinion, will remain far superior because of the meaning behind it. I've even had people tell me that the colorized version regeneration sequence is now the official version. In fact, there seems to be some other things that Phil Collinson would actually also like to make part of the hard canon, isn't there? Just because you put the master music underneath the War Chief and the Doctor does not make the War Chief the master. This follows through on a long-time headcanon fan theory that the War Chief is the master, and it's one that Phil Collinson also believes, and this is what he had to say about it. Although iconic Doctor Who villain the Master wouldn't officially appear in the series until 2 years later, debuting in 1971's Terror of the Autons, many fans have speculated that the War Chief might have been an earlier incarnation of the character. The War Games in Colour, a re-edit of the serial featuring new colorized visuals and a new soundtrack, appeared to lend credence to that theory, incorporating composer Murray Gold's musical theme for the Master into the scenes featuring the War Chief. In my head, the War Chief was always the Master, and we've lent into that, Doctor Who executive producer Collinson told Doctor Who magazine. We've got Murray Gold and Dudley Simpson's Master themes under some of those big confrontations he has with Patrick Troughton. It's brilliant, such brilliant Doctor Who. But when you imagine it's the Doctor and the Master, it becomes even more epic. You end up investing so much more in that character. I mean, what a finale for the second Doctor. I think it's one of the best finales there's ever been. You know what I'm going to say, don't you? I wholeheartedly disagree. Firstly, there were 6 guards that shot the war chief towards the end in the war games. He hit the ground. There was absolutely no way he would have had time to regenerate. Now, I've already had several people say to me that the new regeneration is the official version, even though the original still exists. But then I've also been told that the original still exists if I don't want the war chief to be the master, which is entirely contradictory. Either one version is the hard canon and the other is not. We can't have it both ways, can we? The war chief was introduced in 1969 by Terrence Dicks and Malcolm Holt. The master was introduced in 1971 in the Robert Holmes story, Terror of the Autons. If you turn the war chief into the master, then you've just snubbed Terrence Dicks, Malcolm Holt, Robert Holmes, Edward Brayshaw, who played the war chief, and Roger Delgado, who was the master. You have essentially gone, no, it wasn't that, it's what's in my head, and hard canon had already been established that Roger Delgado is the first master. Mind you, we already know that they don't mind doing things like that, ruining the hard canon, Fugitive Doctor, Timeless Child. Talk about making the world narrow instead of actually expanding on it. The War Games truly probably was the first biggest expansion that we actually got in 1969. It introduced the Warlords, it introduced the War Chief, it introduced the Time Lords, it introduced Gallifrey. That's a lot going on in one go. I sometimes swear that producers, or at least the current day producers, forget that not everyone has read the books, not everyone gets the Doctor Who magazine, not everyone has read the comic strip. A lot of people only watch the TV show and or listen to the Big Finish stories. The War Chief and the Master are two very clear and distinct different characters. If they were ever intended to be the same, then I think the cadences of every single master, and I will include Missy in this, would have been much the same in delivery as Edward Brayshaw, who played the War Chief, was. Extremely clipped and almost militant-like in delivery, as opposed to the mischievous, cunning and conniving deliveries we've had from every single master since 1971. The characters are very different in how they go about achieving their goals. They are not the same, and I don't think they were ever intended to be the same. Is it possible that Robert Holmes got inspiration from the War Chief? Absolutely. But they're not the same, and to make them the same makes the world of Doctor Who so much more narrow just to fit in with a fan's headcanon. I couldn't imagine they would even attempt this if any of the three writers and the two actors were still with us today. Now, that doesn't mean to say that I hate the War Games in colour. I really don't. I really appreciate and I like the time and the effort that they have put into colorizing this. It's a piece of history that we get to see with a splash of colour. I won't be watching it again because I have satisfied my own curiosity and interest in how they were actually going to go about this with the colouring and the regeneration sequence that they told us they were going to be doing. Plus, I have the original version in a hard copy format. And I'm going to consider myself lucky, seeing as everywhere seems to be wanting to move over to streaming platforms anyway. Anyway, that's what I think about the War Games in colour. Let me know what you think. Chat about it, don't chat about it. Thank you very much for watching. I will be back tomorrow at 4 p.m. Bye-bye.